Hey, James.
Yes.
Since we've all been kind of gathering for the last several months, and so it's like now I recognize people's faces, but are people, I mean, I'm not in Spring Green. Where is everybody coming from? Can we find out where everybody's coming from? I'd love to know.
Do a quick introduction.
Yes.
Yeah.
You start, Mary Pat.
Oh, okay. It was my idea, right? You know, you should never have an idea. Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Pat Studdert. I live in Wilmette, so I'm just a little bit north of Chicago. But my husband and I also have a place in Spring Green. So I kind of feel like an honorary Spring Greener.
You are.
And I spend an awful lot of time on Arcadia books when I'm in town.
Yes.
Okay. Diane, you go next. You're next on my screen.
Okay, so I'm Diane Falk. I am calling in or videoing in from Hoffman Estates, which for those of you who don't know where it is, it's a suburb northwest of Chicago. And I'm an occasional visitor to Spring Green, and I do spend most of my time there either at APT or Arcadia Books.
All right. Nancy McDaniel.
Hi. I'm in Chicago. Hi, James. And I have my group of APT pals, Mary Pat and Diane and Genevieve and Karen, and we come up every summer for about 6 days usually and stay with Mary Pat and hang out in Arcadia Books because we have an affinity for James Bonin because a bunch of us have been, well, is that weird? Have been on the board of Remy Bumpo in Chicago, which James started, and we love him and we love APT, and I'm gonna just shut up now.
Okay, that's all the time we have. Thanks for coming tonight.
Bye.
Okay, how about Charlotte and Mike?
Well, we're Mike and Charlotte Smith. We live outside of Spring Green.
Suburb of Spring Green,
Clyde,
Clyde.
the township of Clyde. And we actually are from Chicago. We moved here 7 years ago from Connecticut. So for those Chicago towns, we recognize very much.
So you were nearly neighbors of mine in Wilmette, if you were in Winnetka.
Yes,
Yes.
and a bookstall regular. And when we first moved to Spring Green, there was not a bookstore here.
It almost squelched the deal.
The first question when we were looking at the property, the first question that I asked, and it was in a very accusatory tone, was, why isn't there a bookstore in town? But several years later, after we bought our property, and even before we moved up full time, we finally got it. So thanks.
Okay, Larry.
Larry Nelson. I'm from Waukesha, Wisconsin, which is 15 miles west of Milwaukee, hometown of Les Paul. I've been going to APT for 40 years, and Arcadia is my favorite bookstore.
Thank you. How about Tom and Allison?
Oh, you're on mute.
Off mute, Allison.
Can you hear me? We're in the countryside outside Stoughton, about 15 miles from Madison. Did you want to say anything?
An hour from Spring Green.
And of course, Arcadia is our very favorite bookstore in the world. I have a lot of book selling in my past, so I'm a discerning book shopper, bookstore assessor, and Arcadia is our very favorite. And we are not from Chicago. So.
Well, Allison is also an author and a poet, and we carry her books, just so you know.
Thank you, Nancy.
My name is Bonnie Knipple, and I also am from Waukesha. The last time I saw Larry Nelson was when he was leading a discussion for our local library for a big read. Anyway, yeah. I too am a Spring Green groupie, whether it's APT or the bookstore or just walking down Main Street. I was in love with Donut Shop, until it closed. But anyway, yes, I love Spring Green and the wonderful bookstore. And I'm always looking for more books to read. So looking forward to tonight. Thank you.
Wait, Bonnie, are you saying the bakery with the donuts closed?
Yes. Is that correct, folks?
That's correct. Yes.
I think he retired.
Yes.
Didn't pass it on to someone?
No.
Not yet. Huh?
Hard to pass on a donut.
They were really good, and his breads.
Well, Jen started making little hand pies today, and they're delicious. So,
Mm.
All right.
All right, Darlene.
I'm from Kenosha, Wisconsin. We have a very bad word for people from Illinois, but if you come to Spring Green, we'll forgive you.
No, we know where it is,
Thank you.
right?
No, I won't say
Vendor
it.
thing, right?
If it's an acronym, I think we all know what it is. So,
Right.
okay, and my friend Rebecca.
I'm Rebecca Schroeder. I live about 6 miles outside of Spring Green, but I've lived in the lower Wisconsin River Valley since the mid-70s. I grew up in Illinois, but I've lived in Wisconsin since 1973.
That's okay.
Nice.
What a great quilt. Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was beautiful. So can I just share a really quick, because Allison mentioned the book stall in Winnetka. So when we read Hamnet a couple months ago, I so wanted to get my hands on it, and it wasn't, I think there weren't, I would have had to have waited to get it from Arcadia. And so I went to the book stall and bought it.
Yeah.
And I felt so guilty.
Yeah, I'll bet.
I did. I felt so bad that I wasn't buying it from Arcadia, but I bought it from another independent bookstore. So that I felt okay.
Yeah.
In all seriousness, you should never worry about stuff like that. That's, just support another store. That's fine. You don't have
There's
to.
a bookstore in Chicago called Unabridged, and their best customer is James Bonin. So
Yeah, yeah.
Buy thousands of dollars of that everything.
as long as it's an indie, we're down with it.
Okay.
All right. So we thought we would just, James or I will just start with books that we like that we just couldn't squeeze onto our top 10 lists. There's so many. So maybe we'll start and then you guys just keep jumping in, and if anybody has one they want to share, that would be awesome.
You start.
I have your book, James.
You do? Okay. Wait, hold on. Then you have to, okay.
All right.
Okay, so this was on, I think this was my favorite.
No.
My favorite nonfiction book of the, yes, nonfiction book of the year. This is in the vial. About Churchill's first year as prime minister. But what I think makes the book so great is the personal stuff, the way that Eric Larson wrote it. And so the book that I wanted to, that Nancy was just holding up, and will hold up again, is Eileen Alexander, these letters that were found.
We have that.
We
have it. Love in the Blitz.
That called Love in the Blitz, and it's a book of letters. It's probably 400 letters culled from 1,800 letters that were found that this woman, this extraordinary woman, wrote to her fiance and then finally towards the end of the war husband. But it goes from 1939 all the way through 45. And it tells you the World War II in very, very personal terms. Plus, her family was very well connected politically and diplomatically, so she knew a lot of the players that Churchill knew. But it's just an absolutely extraordinary book. One of the very best books of letters I've ever encountered. So it's called Love and the Blitz. Okay, I've got a whole stack of this, but let's keep going for other people. Yeah.
Okay, I brought one over that James and I both loved, Emma Straub, all adults here. Emma, I love her also because she owns a bookstore in Brooklyn called Books Are Magic. And she's just like the coolest person. I've gotten to meet her a couple of times at different events. Her father's Peter Straub, who's like the thriller, mystery, scary writer that sometimes works with Stephen King. This one is very fun. It's kind of, I don't know, got a little bit of an Olive Kitteridge vibe to it, which is one of my favorite books. What do you think, James? I read this one so long ago.
Yeah.
Put it down with just a few words.
Great stuff about families and about that kind of trying to find a way to make peace with your parents too is I think a really good way to think of it. So if you either are a parent or had parents, the book is for you. That was kind of a joke.
Yes. Okay, I turned some of us to mute just so we didn't get the background noise. So if does anybody want to share another one? Mary Pat.
Unmute my.
Yep.
Oops, she's muted again. Nancy, she's muted again.
There you go.
No, I think what happened is I unmuted and then Nancy muted, and so anyway.
Well, but you're my best friend, so you can go first.
Thank you. So there were just two books that I wanted to share. The first one, I read it so long ago, I think at the beginning of the year, that I can't even, I can barely even talk about what happened in it. But it's a book by Nancy Mitford called, can everybody see that? It's called The Pursuit of Love. I have no idea. Oh, yes, I do. It was written in 1945, and there was, in every weekend's Wall Street Journal, somebody gives their 5 favorite books and that are based around a theme. And this was one of them. And it sounds interesting. I know a little bit about the Mitford sisters. There were what, 5 or 6 of them in England? 5. This is a novel, but she based it loosely on her family. So you have this upper class English family kind of in the interwar period. And you know what, in a way, it's kind of like an APT play. This book is a classic, but talk about contemporary overtones. I felt like I was reading a story that was happening now. And this is kind of not my usual fare of kind of this family who lives in an old English country house and they're running around being upper class but they have these grand adventures. It's really well written. Of course, all the girls in the family are falling in love and trying to find husbands, but some of their problems actually, like I say, are more, they come off as being contemporary. If I remember correctly, I think somebody got pregnant and they weren't married. But you also realize that our lives are no different from what was happening in 1945 as 1925. It's just the human story year after year. It didn't take me a long time to read. It was an easy, what I would call an easy read, but it wasn't vapid reading. So I don't know. I just thought it was delightful. And when I finished it, I was telling all sorts of people about it. And they were kind of looking at me like, a 1945 book? Yes. Yes. And I think she's written 2 sequels to it. I haven't read either of those, but I could go on with more Nancy Mitford. But the one that I wanted that's contemporary that I wanted to share is called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. It came out 2019, 2020. I can't remember exactly. I bought it months back and I finally got around to reading it about a month ago. So, excuse me, Lori Gottlieb is in real life is a psychotherapist. And she's also a well-known, well, I didn't know her, but to people who know her, she's a well-known author, and her books have appeared on New York Times best-selling lists. I think a lot of them are, or some of them are self-help type books. And if Mr. Bookseller, if any of this is wrong, please correct me. But this book is about, I guess I would call it a memoir. So she's a therapist and she has a horrible breakup in her life and discovers shortly after that, although she's a therapist, she actually needs a therapist because she is not handling life very well at all. So part of her own therapy is she writes about her process of how she got through this and finding a therapist. And she writes really well, really intelligently. Anybody who's ever had a therapeutic relationship with a therapist, it's kind of interesting to be on the outside looking in. But you learn about her life, what made her who she is. She actually went to medical school. She wanted to be a journalist. So she's a real interesting person. And you get these chapters where she's writing about her patient. And she said none of the names are real, and they're compilations. But then you have another chapter where she's with her therapist, trying to unpack her own life. And of course, that dovetails with what's happening with her patients. And I don't know, I just found it incredibly fascinating. I learned a lot. My book is all marked up just because there were things that she said that I went, oh, wow, that's, about human behavior. So that's my recommendation for one of my favorites.
Nancy, you wanted to go next? Nancy McDaniel?
Well, it's always hard to follow Mary Pat because she's really smart. And and I just am much more like visceral and emotional. But I read so many books this year, and my probably favorite is The Overstory. And when I discovered it, and I sent an email to James, and he was like, "Well, yeah, duh." I mean, I talked about this like last year, and it's like the best book. And I'm kind of late to the party sometimes, but I loved it so much, and kind of being stuck at home, and I would sit on my deck looking I live in the city, right? But I have 2 kind of big-ish trees, and I would sit there and read this book, and I so fell in love with trees. And I loved the research, and I don't know, it was probably, I have a number of favorite books of the year, but that one was amazing. I'm a a complete fan of Frederick Backman. I think he's Swedish? some kind of Scandinavian. And I love all of his books, and I read his newest one, and that made me really happy. But I always wonder, and you guys could possibly help with this. There are some authors from other countries who their native language is not ours, and they have just a beautiful way of words. And I often wonder if it's their translator that does the beautiful words, or if it's the original author. I mean, do you know what I'm saying? I mean, I find that really curious. Anyway, that's it.
Well, you know, they give awards. Many places give awards for translating during the year, and being a good translator is extremely difficult, I think. But I think he does have, I think under normal circumstances, the answer to your question would be it's Hoffman's writing has to be handled by a good translator who understands his rhythms and understands his word choices and takes the huge amount of time that creates pleasure for you in another language. Much the same way that, you know, the wonderful woman who translates Ferrante's is done for her. And one thing about the overstory, I remember reading before the hardbound came out in, I think the winter of 2018 or 17, one or the other. But I can remember sitting in the apartment I'd rented in San Francisco and just almost throwing the book across the room about 40 times because I kept thinking, because I know Richard Powers. I mean, I've met him a couple of times and talked to him a number of times, and I think he's a fabulous writer. And I just kept thinking to myself, this is the best damn book that you'll ever write, and it's so brilliant. And I hope people read it because it's a 600-page book about trees.
I know.
Because he was so brilliant with the 9 characters that it just carries you through, you know, all of these unbelievable things that you learn about science and about trees and weather. And, you know, I think the book is not only a great novel, it's a huge public service. Because it's educated, you know, thousands and thousands of people to things they would never have had any connection to.
Well, you know what, James, I also thought, because I go to Africa a lot, as some of you know, people of you who know me. And I remember one time, my guide was telling me about the acacia trees and how they were basically protected, because if the giraffes would come and they would feed on the acacia trees and they would overfeed on them, then the acacia trees would basically sort of send a message to the next acacia tree to like shut it down. So they would do a toxic or, you know, unpleasant thing. So that the giraffes would come and they would be like, no. So it was a protective thing. And that was a thing, that was a big thing that the woman, the scientist in that book, who was disavowed by a lot of people, talked about. And I just, oh my God, I love that.
And that's all been proven to be true, of course. But
I know. And there was just an article about that recently. So yeah, it's great.
Great. Who's next? Somebody has to go.
Arlette.
Nancy Baden.
Okay, there we go. I just thought it was interesting that the first series of books started with the Second World War, because that was actually a book I'm trying to talk about. Followed on it was right at the end of the Second World War. It was Warlight, And I do think it was out last year, but I read it at the beginning of this year, got it as a Christmas gift, and read it at the beginning of 2020. And I found it very interesting because it talked about, I think, if you will, well, the war was over, but it wasn't really over. You had children that had to sort out what really had been going on in their family during the war. Their mother was a spy and was involved in the continuing to do work as the Western powers were being very afraid of communists, and so she was still active after the war. And I just found it very, very interesting that the this notion of not just limiting it to the effects of the Second World War, but more broadly speaking, the need to make sense of things that you have experienced, I thought was the larger story. The author, I cannot pronounce his last name. It was the author, Michael, who he wrote The English Patient. I don't pronounce it, but.
Maniace.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book. Yeah. Do you have another one? Either of you have another book?
Well, the other one that I would mention was Louise Erdrich La Rose, and that was very good. I enjoyed that, and it led me to request as a Christmas present for her new book coming. And I've always been a fan of that, and it really is she's a good storyteller. And I think that probably influenced me more than anything else. The characters are real. You get a feeling for the settings that she has, and even originally I'm from up close to that part of the world, and so a lot of it just sat very well with me.
Right. Yeah, it's a beautiful book too. Oh, she's fabulous. Okay. Who's next? Anyone have an idea?
I can go.
Okay.
I can go. I really had trouble deciding which was my favorite. It was either this or Shuggie Bain, which I just finished. But the one I chose is Notes on a Silencing by Lacey Crawford. And this is a memoir that she wrote about her experience getting sexually assaulted when she was in boarding school by boys that were about 5 years older than her. And I thought it was interesting because she doesn't limit herself to the usual guilt and responsibility, and it was my fault of the victim of a sexual assault. She really goes deeper and tries to understand why what happened to her, could that be called rape? Because what happened to her wasn't the Bill Clinton definition of sex. And rape is usually, people say rape is non-consensual intercourse, and that's not what happened to her. And so she talks a lot about, what do I even call this? And the school knew about it, and her family didn't know the school knew for a long time. And they had buried it. The school had buried it because they didn't want their reputation soiled. And even people in her hometown knew about what had happened there, and that she had ended up with herpes, and she didn't even know yet. And so it was just the whole thing, besides the assault, was just so ugly, and the way she was treated. And I myself survived a sexual assault by a family member. So this was a really compelling book for me to read. And it was affirming. It wasn't upsetting, it was affirming.
Wow.
Great. I really wish I could have read that. Talk about Shuggie Bain too. You don't have to just talk about one book. Talk about Shuggie.
Well, I loved that story, and her writing was amazing. It's about a young boy growing up in poverty in Ireland, and he's gay, and so he's struggling with his sexual identity. His mother's an alcoholic, and his two older siblings leave because they can't stand what the mother's behavior anymore, and leave him kind of on his own when he's very young. And it's just really eye-opening. You never think about poverty in other places. Like I think about, slums in big cities in the US, but other countries, developed countries, have a lot of poverty too. And it was just really well written. And I think it won the Booker Prize. That's why I read it, because I tend to gravitate towards award-winning books. Very good book.
And it's his first book. He's 44 years old. He lives in New York, and it's his first book.
Well, it's somewhat a memoir, I think.
Yeah.
Not exactly, but it is a takeoff on his own life.
Yeah. Exactly.
And in the end, it's got a really happy ending, actually, with a young friend that he makes, and she has a mother who's an alcoholic too, and he starts to help her deal with her own mother, and it's a very good ending.
Oh, great. Nice.
Can I just say one thing about Notes on the Silencing, the Lacey Crawford book? Earlier this summer, Lacey interviewed another author, and it's on our website, or on our YouTube channel. But oh my gosh, she is a fantastic interviewer. So she interviewed Carrie Arsenal for Milltown. So if you have time to go back and watch that interview, I mean, Lacey should be a professional. She should be like Terry Gross or somebody. She's really good.
She's really intelligent, just way out there.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody want to go next?
Well, I hate to pick a book that we've already discussed, but Hamnet was my favorite book. And the scene at the end when she goes to the theater to see Hamlet, it was such an exciting conclusion. And the whole book, it was like, how have you never seen your husband's plays? And I just thought it worked so perfectly. It was such an exciting conclusion. And especially you're dealing with the grief and everything else. I was not expecting such an exhilarating, really happy ending for that book.
I have another one that I just want to put in a quick plug. Right after this Zoom call, I'm going to be listening to an interview between Mary Burke and Erin Brockovich about this book that Erin Brockovich just put out. It's called Superman's Not Coming: Our National Water Crisis and What We the People Can Do About It. It's kind of a how-to book for grassroots activism about drinking water issues. So right after this, at 7 o'clock, Mary Burke is going to be interviewing her. And Mary lives right here. She's my neighbor.
Hey, Larry. Larry?
Yes?
One of the reasons that she probably wouldn't see her husband's plays is that nobody traveled.
Right.
I mean, that's in all of Shakespeare's plays, you always know the people with money because they're the people traveling. But in Shakespeare's time, 94% of the people in the world were born, lived, and died within 2 miles of their house. I mean, no one traveled. And, and that wonderful sequence in Hamnet where it takes 4 days for a letter to get there, and it takes 4 days, to get to London from Stratford is an example. It was just a huge chore for people to travel. Now, she had money because her husband was becoming successful, could have gone, but she also, I think, was, that was part of, I think, Maggie O'Farrell's point, was that she had a full life and she had
right. But you would have thought when Shakespeare came home, he would have talked about his plays, but it made sense when you learned about what she was like. She probably wasn't that interested because she was so involved in what she was. And I don't know, I never knew anything about her, and I realize it's total fiction, but it was great that she was brought to life and she was really Shakespeare's equal. And you kind of understood why he wasn't there and why she didn't go there. But that's why it was so great that she did get to see it at the end.
I agree.
It was unexpected.
Yeah, it was completely unexpected. It was fabulous. And the setup too. I mean, how hard it was to get there, that she goes into his rooms and she realizes he's writing a letter to her. I mean, they're just before she sees the play, and just watching her, you can imagine her watching people watch the play, with having no concept really of how any of it worked. Yeah, it's really quite an extraordinary piece of imagining, I think, on Maggie O'Farrell's part. Really good.
I can't remember if we talked about this when we talked about the book, or if this was just James and I talking a different time, but how Shakespeare played the ghost, Hamlet's father. And so in a way he could then have the conversation. So he was able to speak to Hamlet, so he could fulfill this, dream of being able to speak with his almost adult son, even though he was long dead.
Yeah, and no one is absolutely certain that he played the ghost, but there's enough clues in various ways that people think. But and I agree with you. Yeah, that's very potent.
And the author, I assume, wrote it way before the pandemic, but the pandemic made it so contemporary and relevant to what's going on. You didn't have to imagine what it was like.
Exactly. Yeah. Boy. It won the Women's Fiction Prize, which is a very prestigious award. So it's good, and it's also one of the New York Times best 10 books of the year, and my favorite book. But it's really something. Gosh. Okay, and I think I said this during the book club talk about it, but because that play is so suffused with grief, it's just so obvious. I mean, in other words, it isn't a leap at all to think that, of course, that's why it took him 3 years to sort of turn his grief into art, but it's just really something. Okay, Nick, who's got some more that they want to talk about?
Do you want to unmute yourself, Allison?
So Hamnet was actually my favorite book too of the year, but I've got a special affection for odd and adventurous heroines in historical novels. So the book I especially want to recommend is called Caris in the World of Wonders. I don't know if people can see it if I hold it up. I'm not very good on chat, so it's Caris, Charis, in the World of Wonders. And the author is Marley Yeomans, Youmans. It's set in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And when we meet the heroine, she's escaping from her house, which has been set on fire. And she has a whole series of adventures. It comes close to being accused of being a witch. But the language in this book is just astonishing. A friend told me about it, a poet friend. Yeomans is a poet too. And it's just, I found it incredibly gorgeous and gripping. It's probably my second favorite after Hamnet, because I thought Hamnet had such beautiful language. Did you guys get the title okay? Kara said The World of Wonders by Marley Yeomans. And then the other one that I just finished this. I think I ordered this from Arcadia, maybe. Miss Benson's Beetle involves two misfits women, one who's sort of a Marilyn Monroe type, and the other one who's a awkward, woman who's always stumbling over her own feet. And the awkward one falls in love with a gold beetle when she's a child, and they go to the South Seas in search of this beetle. So it's quite a charming book, very different kind of tone. And that's by Rachel Joyce. She wrote The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, which some of you have probably read. Did I order this from you guys at Arcadia?
I think you did. Yeah.
I think I did. Yeah. And I have one other book to put a pitch in for. I looked around my house and I couldn't find it. It's another adventure, two young women in 1912, half sisters. It's called The Voyage of the Morning Light. And it's two young women who end up also in the South Seas, and they go through a variety of adventures, which I won't go into, but it's also beautiful. It's by Marina Endicott, who's a Canadian writer.
Great.
Oh, Tom wants
I'll jump in then.
wants to add a book too.
Because of the pandemic, I found myself gravitating towards World War II novels and nonfiction as well. But the most fascinating book that I read was a book a friend gave me called The Game of Wrens and Wolves. And it's the story of the U-boat and the convoy battles. Early in the war, Britain was losing that battle. The Germans were sinking way more ships than the British could build. And towards the end of 1941, Churchill turned to this retired Commodore who was a war gamer, and told him to devise a game to teach how to attack and sink the German U-boats. And this guy had a staff of about 20 women Wrens. I can't remember what the acronym means, Women Reserve something. Ages ranged from 18 to 25. And he devised this game, devised some new tactics. So these grizzled destroyer captains would come in all exhausted from convoy, and they were told to go take a week's course. And it's the last thing they wanted to do. But you had these 18-year-old women telling these grizzled captains, I wouldn't do that if I were you, sir. And they taught them better tactics. And within 6 months, they changed it all around, and they started sinking the German U-boats like crazy and defending the convoys. And it was literally more than the Battle of Britain that this guy and his crew saved England during the war. Yeah. And right now, I found myself decided to reread Watership Down. I don't know why it popped into my head, but I just wanted a good novel to get lost in, and I hadn't read it since 40 years ago when it came out. And it's kind of neat because I hardly remember anything of the plot, so it's like I'm reading it all over again. And so it's a good one to get lost in for me.
The Game of Wrens and Wolves is nonfiction, though. That's it, right?
Yeah, it's nonfiction.
Nonfiction, yeah.
I think Wrens isn't it the Women's Royal Cable Service or something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay. Wow. Cool. Oh, and Charis in the World of Wonders, it's a recent book, right?
It's recent, yeah. I think, let me check the date. I think it just came out this year.
We'll order that because it sounds great.
Yeah, and they're beautiful editions too. Let me just check. 2020, yeah, 2020 paperback.
Okay. Thank you. Others?
Lady Clementine, I bought that at Arcadia.
At Arcadia.
When it was our last trip there, like in January or something.
Right before.
Yeah, well, everything went to hell. And that was a good book. I really enjoyed that. It was the whole World War II from Churchill's wife, her view of how things happened. And actually the unknown role that she played in meetings with cabinet and strategies and all kinds of stuff. That was a good book.
Yeah, and The Splendid and the Vile, she and her daughter play prominent.
Yeah.
And you can just see the effect that they both had on Churchill.
So I've been trying to keep up with everybody. I started, unfortunately, after Mary Pat's suggestions, and I've been putting them in the chat. And then Mary Pat says that WREN stands for Women's Royal Navy Service.
Okay.
Cool.
Diane, did you have something you wanted to say?
Sure. Well, I have to confess that my work schedule this year kept me from doing much reading at all. It was hard to even keep up with my New Yorkers, and spent a lot of time working and a lot of time doom scrolling. But I'm with Larry. Hamnet was my favorite of what I did read. One of the other ones I started reading, I haven't finished it yet, but it's a book of short stories. For anybody that's into science fiction, Exhalation, Ted Chiang. So I've been finding that short stories are really good for me right now because, again, I can read something and not get into it and end up putting it down for a while. The other one that's kind of fun, if anybody else is like a Star Trek or a science geek, my son and I took a class with a professor from Duke a few months ago who teaches biological anthropology using characters from Star Trek, some of the aliens and things on Star Trek. And this is his book. So Live Long and Evolve, which is kind of fun.
Great title.
And then for two totally frivolous things that I'm almost embarrassed to admit in this group of intellectual people. But if you really, really need something totally silly and escapist, these two books, and I know Mary Pat's read them too.
They're fabulous.
They're Obama and Biden mystery books, and they're just silly and frivolous and fun and goofy and that's it. And then other than that, I read through some political stuff and everything, but we don't want to read any more of that.
It's Diane.
I heard those books about Obama and Biden are nonfiction. It's just not well known.
I wish that were true.
It's Diane's fault that I've read both of those, and they were so fun and just you know what? They just make you smile, and they're an easy read, and I'd recommend them to everybody.
Yeah.
So, let me jump in because making someone smile. This I didn't mean for this to be a pun, but I'm halfway through. Oh no, the dog's going to start barking here. Hannah, stop! I'll feed you in 10 minutes. It'll be a great ending to the book. Yeah, okay. Jane Smiley. Where am I? Here I am. Jane Smiley's book, Perestroika in Paris. Absolutely, it's just a wonderful, sweet book about a 3-year-old horse and a German short-haired pointer and a crow who are living rough in Paris in 2008. Hey, stop it. But I'm going to mute myself. Anyway, I'll write about it probably at the first of the year. Hannah, I'm going to throw something at you in a second. But it's really a great book. But it's also very smart about all sorts of things about both human behavior and animal behavior. And what it really does, what really sort of astonishes me, because I've never had I've been here, I've never had a bad experience with any Parisians, but everybody in America hates Parisians. But all these people, all the people that animals interact with are just so kind to them. And nobody tries to throw them in jail. Nobody tries to figure out why they're on their own. This little boy, this 8-year-old boy who lives with his great-grandmother who's 97 and she's deaf and blind, thank goodness, lives in this huge old house near the Champ de Mars. He brings the horse into the house for a few days. And the horse is living in one of the rooms of the house. I mean, it's really sweet and fun. And Nancy Bainan assures me that nothing bad's going to happen, because if something bad happened, I'd throw the book out the window. But it's just really, really good. Jane Smiley, she's written so many good books, but this is just really sweet.
There's actually a fun book I read years ago, and I don't remember who it's by, but it was called Spotted in France, about a man and his dog who travel around on his Vespa all over France. And it's just fun and it's cute. It's called Spotted in France. And I read it, I don't know, probably 10 years ago, but I just still remember it as being such a fun book.
Great.
And since we're talking about horses, the other book that I loved this year, I'm not sure if it was written this year, was Ginger Gaffney's book, Half Broke. And I know that you guys did an interview with Pam Houston and her, that I just loved that book.
Yeah, it was a beautiful book.
Having been around horses my whole life, I really
Great.
loved that.
Yeah, they're both remarkable women. But
Oh, man.
really cool. Right. Anybody else have any more ideas?
Yep, I'd like to throw out a couple of ideas this year. Now, I have not read Hamnet. That was on my to-do list if I was given the book so far. But I discovered an author, Peter Guy. You know of him. He's out of Minnesota, and the book of his, I think he's written 4 books, but the book of his that I particularly like was written a few years back. It's called Safe from the Sea. Yeah. And it's about a crusty old former captain from the Great Lakes. He's retired, and he's getting older. Maybe he's in his 70s, and he reconnects with his son that he hasn't had a relationship for years. So, it's kind of an old classic story, but I like his writing, his descriptive words that he uses. It's just beautiful, almost lyrical. The same author, he did have a new book out this year, Northernmost. And it's more or less part of a trilogy, and it follows a Norwegian family from, I think, late 1700s, 1800s to current day. Half of it kind of flip-flops back and forth. And in particular, this book is with a woman from nowadays, and then it goes back to her ancestors and various connections. Again, well written, but I love his style of writing. What more can I say? If you've read him, maybe you'll know, or if you haven't read him, give it a try.
Thanks. Anybody else? Going once, going twice. Okay, where did Nancy Bainan go? She's off my screen now.
I don't actually have another book, but I wanted to ask Nancy, are you taking notes, and are you going to send those out? We're not so good at knowing how to get them out.
I've been writing them in the chat, but yeah, I'll make a whole list that we can so everybody can see.
Yeah, I've been writing them down too. I think I wrote them all down. Okay, I have 2. Oh, wait, one. Oh, I almost forgot this. One book that I read early in the year. This is the British version, so the book in the store doesn't look quite like this, but it's Julian Barnes's book, The Man in the Red Coat, which is a kind of social history of this certain group of people right around the turn of the 20th century, and a kind of an amazing group of people in France. Barnes writes a lot of, in addition to his beautiful novels, he writes a lot of art history and art kind of thoughtful art essays. But this book is based, he got interested in it because he saw this painting in a Sargent exhibition in 2015 of this man in the red coat, which is an extraordinary painting. And so he just wanted to know who this man was, and then that led him to this book. But it's a really beautifully written book about both good and bad behavior among a certain class of French intellectuals and artists. And it's really, I really strongly recommend it. I think it'll be out fairly soon in paperback. And then this is the first book that we'll be dealing with in the beginning of the new year, meaning we'll be reading it. Nancy and I attended a master class that he taught. It's George Saunders' book about his famous class on 19th century Russian short stories that he taught for 20 years in Syracuse. It's called A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, which is a line from one of Chekhov's most famous stories called Gooseberries. I've read about a third of it. It's 7 stories. The stories are in the book, and then there's these long kind of detailed ways of really thinking about how a story works. So it's a kind of, you get the stories, you get he and his sort of students exploring why each story works. And it's a kind of masterclass both in writing, but just as importantly, it's a masterclass in reading. Sort of help you learn how to, think about a story as you're reading it. It's really exciting stuff. And then the other thing I have to say, because of my own personal interest in his life, is this is coming out in February. It's Hermione Lee's biography of Tom Stoppard. And it's, again, this friend of mine at the London Review Bookshop sent this to me. So this hasn't been published in America yet, but it's, she wrote, the sort of the classic biography of Virginia Woolf, Hermione Lee. She also wrote an unbelievably good biography of, oh my God, her name just went on my head. It'll come to me in 1 second. Never mind, I'll go on with Stoppard. But the Stoppard is, I've only read a little bit of it. But I think it's going to be really great. Now, it probably isn't. It's probably much more than most people ever want to know about him. But he's a pretty fascinating guy, and he chose her to do the biography because he loves her writing so much. And she spent the last 5 years, he gave her access to everything. And he's a very, very private guy. So, if there's ever going to be a book that sort of puts Stoppard's brain and heart together, this will be the book.
James, I bet you were thinking of the Penelope Fitzgerald.
Thank you. I kept, the word Fitz would not come into my head. The sound Fitz. Yeah, but her biography of Penelope Fitzgerald, who's one of my favorite writers, even though I can't remember her name, and that biography is absolutely magnificent. And speaking of World War II, Human Voices, a novel by Penelope Fitzgerald, is
that's wonderful.
Great books about young women working at the BBC at the beginning of World War II. Who said that? Somebody said that.
We have it.
I think Allison liked that one too.
Yes, I did.
Really, really great. And it's funny, when I was reading, oh my God, my brain is mush. Kate Atkinson's book about World War, called Transcription. And as I was reading it, I kept thinking, I wonder if she must have read Penelope Fitzgerald's Human Voices. And at the end, she has a list of things that she read. And Kate Atkinson said, much to my embarrassment, I had never read Penelope Fitzgerald, and now Human Voices is my very favorite novel of the entire 20th century. So, it's just one of those great books that sort of sneaks up on you. Sorry, I just blathered for 6 minutes and now we're out of time. But anything else, Nance? You can.
Does anybody want to know what our top selling books of the year are? I just looked this up today.
Sure.
Yeah. Let's end on this and then be surprised if this ends up in the newsletter. Act like you don't already know. Number 1, A Promised Land by Barack Obama. The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse was number 2. White Fragility, Cast, What It's Like to Be a Bird, Hamnet, How to Be Anti-Racist, The Splendid and the Vile, The Second Home, and Too Much and Never Enough by Mary Trump. So, the nonfictions are a story of the year.
Yeah.
If only we'd had a pandemic book or something in there, but yeah.
Every book's a pandemic book, I think.
Okay, I'm just going to add this. I won't say much. I'll just add it to our list. But this was really good. If you want a creepy,
Oh, yeah.
haunting of Hill House kind of story,
Yeah.
this is a fun one. Second Gothic.
Is that book in paperback yet?
Not yet. I can't remember when it came out, but it'll probably in the next few months. It will be.
Okay.
That was great. I mean, just getting all those, because there were lots of older books, newer books. I love that. I mean, just because it doesn't have to be a book from 2020. It's just a book you read in 2020, and that's really wonderful. It's a great list, and we'll get the list out both on the website and to all of you, via email. Via email, Nancy? Yeah.
Yeah, I could email it. Yep.
Great.
Thank you. This was fun.
It was fun.
Yeah,
We're,
enjoyed it.
we're so sorry not to be at the store making our Christmas journey. But we order.
Yes, you do. Well, the end is in sight.
Yes, yeah. There's hope.
Maybe by the summer we'll be back to a little normalcy.
Hope so.
Yeah, yeah.
See.
Okay, have a great holiday, everybody.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you
Very
guys.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
We'll
Merry
see you
Christmas.
January 13th for To the Lighthouse.
Yes, to the lighthouse.
All right.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.